I'm a believer in original public meaning. We always call original intent. Like, this is what the founders intended, but what specifically is more important than that is, what did the people that ratified the Constitution understand it to mean? Because that's original public meaning, and that's what we should be going off of. Do you believe that anyone, any of the states, any of the legislatures who ratified the Constitution and the amendments, do you think that any of them would have ever signed up to a situation or a union where the federal government can deprive the states the right to protect themselves? Under no circumstances. So basically, our founders are very clear. The federal courts are not the supreme arbiters of the Constitution. Those are the states. And when we get into a situation where they're trying to deprive you of inalienable rights to protect yourself, your family, that's the Second Amendment, or Article 1, Section 10, which is the right of you corporately to protect your state and your community. That's what Article 1, Section 10 says. It says the states, if they're actually invaded, can protect themselves against invasion. But it wasn't just in the Constitution, it was in the Articles of Confederation. And so that's something the founders brought forward from the agreement, the compact that we had when we first started the United States in 1776, all the way to the time the Constitution was written and ratified in 1789. It's that language goes all the way back, but the thing that's interesting is the founders even talked about it. There's extensive writings about Article 1, Section 10. It's inalienable. Like, you can't bargain it away, you can't give it away. It's not subject to court interpretation. So that's the deal. State of Texas, our legislature is basically the arm and the voice of the people. Federalist 26, I talk about this all the time, but I think it's really important to recognize that the founders understood that the state legislatures are the most powerful branch of government. They're the ones who created the federal government. They're the ones that ratified the Constitution. And if there's any solution in all this, they said very clearly that that the state legislature should be suspicious and jealous guardians of the tyrannies of the federal government against the people. And if they should be the arm and the voice of the people in times of this distress. And this is what we're in. So we're in difficult times. I think that, we talk about it all the time. Listen, we have to get Donald Trump in there. President Trump has to be the president. Without question. But here's the deal. We need to put safeguards in place for our state security. In the time between the first legislative session to the fourth session, 1.2 million illegals. In the time that the Texas House hand-wrung as to whether they should even make trespassing across the border a criminal offense, in that time, 1.2 million illegals crossed the Texas-Mexico border. Just let that sink in. There's only 30 million people in Texas. This is part of the globalist agenda to deprive Texas and the states of secure elections. And so, anyways, I kind of jumped into that because it's kind of on my mind, and I think that it's really important to recognize that the areas that the federal government is exercising its power against the states and weaponizing, their overreach, you see it in two areas. You see it in the border, and you see it in elections. Talk about elections for just one moment. How many people know that, in the last few months, the federal courts have ruled that Texas has to accept mail-in ballots even if the information on the mail-in ballot is wrong? It's absolutely insane. So, anyways, Amanda, I'm sorry, what does that mean? Oh. Hey, listen, I can bloviate forever. Anyways, but I hope that was interesting, but it's very serious, and I'm not being flippant about it. Hey, so what I want to do is I want to introduce State Representative Brian Harrison. Brian actually was kind enough to come up tonight and be our MC, so I want to introduce him. He's actually one of the 5 conservatives in the Texas House that's willing to stand up and fight for our, so welcome, Brian Harrison.
Thank you. Howdy. Good evening. Man, it's great to be with y'all here today in Decatur. It's a short little drive over from my district. I'm really honored to get to represent House District 10 in the Texas House of Representatives. And for those of you who don't know where House District 10 is, it's in Ellis County. So I've got Waxahachie, Midlothian, Ennis, and just really proud to represent. That's the area I grew up in, my friends and neighbors in the Texas legislature. I will tell you though, because since I don't, my district isn't super close to you out here, a lot of folks don't know who I am. I haven't had a chance to meet a lot of you. Before I got elected to the Texas House of Representatives, I had the distinct honor of working for somebody named President Donald J. Trump. And I served as his chief of staff at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services during the Trump administration. And we could be here all night talking about the great, historic pro-liberty, pro-freedom, conservative victories that we delivered for the American people. I'm incredibly proud to have been a part of that administration. And I tell you what, when we left office on noon, January 20th, 2020, I don't think I could have imagined standing here exactly 3 years later, 3 years and a couple days. And I don't think I could have imagined the absolute unmitigated destruction that Joe Biden has unleashed on our country. And I don't know about you. Who in this room is ready for a president who once again puts America first? Well, it's time. It's past time for that. That's why I'm here tonight. We need help. We need conservative fighters across the state of Texas, across the country. But let me tell you, when I returned home, I worked, like I said, for every minute we were in the Trump administration, trying to drag as many conservative victories across the finish line as we could before we left office. I could be here all night talking about that, but I'll tell you two things I was most proud to have been involved in to help President Trump. Number one, as his chief of staff at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, we kept our word. We kept our promise that many Republicans had made for generations but not followed through on. We kept our promise and our commitment to the unborn, and I was proud to help President Trump defund Planned Parenthood for the first time in 50 years. And I'm also very proud that after COVID hit, we took our responsibility seriously, and it was my agency, the Department of Health and Human Services, that put Title 42 in place to lock down our border and secure the integrity of our border and immediately deport illegal aliens the moment they crossed. Guys, people forget about this. It's been 3 years. When we were operationalizing Title 42, we were deporting, think about this, over 90% of illegal alien crossings within 2 hours. Guys, when Joe Biden put his hand on that Bible and he became the president of the United States, he inherited the most secure border our nation's ever seen. All he had to do to keep our border secure was what? Yeah, go back to the basement and take a nap. Unfortunately, he didn't do that, did he? No. Joe Biden has unleashed unmitigated disaster and destruction, the likes of which our nation's never seen. And let me tell you what, there was an opportunity right after I got back from working for President Trump to run for the Texas legislature. And I was very excited that my friends and neighbors and colleagues back home saw fit to send me as their voice for freedom, their fighter for liberty in the Texas House of Representatives. And after having done battle in the swamp with President Trump, delivering historic victory after historic victory, I was so excited to finally be a member of the Texas legislature, the Texas House of Representatives, because I assumed that every elected Republican in the state of Texas was a fire-breathing conservative fighter for freedom and liberty like those of us in the Trump administration were. I was so excited to get to the Texas House and lock arms with all of these elected Republicans in Texas who were going to put you and your kids first. And oh boy, was I surprised. I get elected to the Texas House, and what do I find out? Holy cow, the Democrats are running the joint. In the Republican-dominated Texas House of Representatives, we've got Democrats chairing all of our committees. Who's the most powerful person in the Texas House of Representatives? I'll tell you, because you don't know the answer. It's a name of somebody who's never been elected by anybody, but he's got more power than anybody else in that building. His name's Hugh Brady. He is the House parliamentarian. Every time a Republican tries to offer a pro-liberty bill or amendment, the parliamentarian gets to decide whether we can vote on it. When a Democrat wants to put some disastrous liberal amendment on a good bill, it's the parliamentarian that gets to decide whether it lives or dies. He gets to advance the cause of liberalism and kill the cause of conservatism. The House parliamentarian, ladies and gentlemen, is a Democrat Party activist and a former Barack Obama White House lawyer. That's right, you heard that correctly. One of Barack Obama's staffers is running the Texas House of Representatives. That's true. And people wonder why the Texas House of Representatives is where conservative bills go to die, and they wonder why that is, and they should be angry about it. Guys, there were only 8 legislative priorities put out by the Republican Party of Texas. Only 8. I bet I voted on 2,000 to 3,000 things in this last session. The Republican Party of Texas, you, the activists, you asked us to do 8 things. The failed liberal leadership of the Texas House of Representatives said no. But what did they do instead? I had my staff look into this. Instead of passing our 8 Republican priorities, The failed liberal leadership of the Texas House of Representatives prioritized over 500 Democrat bills and put them on the floor. Over 500 Democrat priorities, guys. And we couldn't get our 8 done. It's a shame. The same coalition that I was fighting with President Trump in the swamp of D.C., the liberal Democrats, the mainstream media, and perhaps the worst of them all, establishment weak liberal Republicans, guys, that same coalition is running the Texas House of Representatives, and we need help. We need more conservative fighters to join us in the Texas House who will never forget that it's you who they fight for. It's the principles that made our state and our country great, the principles of individual liberty, freedom, secure borders, governments that are constrained in its power by the limits placed on it by our Constitution. That's why I'm here tonight to support Andy Hopper for the Texas House of Representatives. And how many of you, when you're talking to various elected officials in Austin, especially if they're in the Texas House, have ever said, hey, why couldn't we get this conservative priority passed? Why didn't we get border security, like the really big, bold border security bills? Why didn't that pass? Why haven't we banned all COVID vaccine mandates in the state of Texas? You may not know that. We still have COVID vaccine mandates for students. They're still allowed in Texas. Why haven't we done that? Have you ever been told, well, we just ran out of time? We tried. I'm with you. I agree. We should ban COVID mandates, but would you look at the time? Well, let me tell you what, it's intentional. And let me tell you what the failed liberal leadership of the Republican-dominated Texas House of Representatives had us do instead of passing the priorities that would have preserved prosperity and guaranteed more freedom for my kids and your grandkids in the last week of our legislative session. Instead of stopping the communist Chinese from buying our farmland, instead of ending taxpayer-funded lobbying, instead of passing school choice, instead of putting Texas on a path to eliminate property taxes, what did the failed liberal leadership of the Texas House prioritize for us to do the whole last week of session? Impeach your Attorney General of the state of Texas. And let me tell you real quick, as somebody who was there, what it was like for me. You remember where you were when you found out we were going to have an impeachment and how shocked you were? I'm an elected member of the Texas House of Representatives. I was on the floor of the House, and I was as shocked as you because I found out about it at the same time as you. There was an investigation that was conducted in secret. At most, it only could have lasted a couple months, at most. There were no witnesses put under oath. There was no cross-examination of any witnesses. There were no signed declarations. When we asked the speaker any questions about whether we were going to be given anything that even looked like new evidence or sufficient evidence or compelling evidence, we were told he didn't know. I had quite literally, not a joke, my desk, they walked by late on a night, dropped 20 articles of impeachment on my desk with nothing but a transcript of one hearing. That was it. Guys, there is more due process in third world kangaroo courts than there was in the impeachment of our Attorney General. And let me tell you something, guys. There was no defense. There is no defense for my colleagues who trusted the word of our liberal speaker when he told them to vote for it. And let me tell you what, here's how you know that the leadership of the Texas House has failed. And also how you know, by the way, he could pass all of your priorities if he wanted to. If the Speaker of the House could get 60 Republicans to vote to overturn an election on the basis of no evidence, we could vote and pass every single Republican priority that you deserve. So we're going to come back up in a minute. I'm going to introduce a special guest, somebody I'm very honored to get to introduce to you. And before I do that, though, I want to say one more word about this impeachment issue, because there's a lot of confusion about this. Impeachments are not primarily about guilt or innocence of somebody. They're about protecting our states. They're about protecting our cherished institutions. They're not about an individual. And the reason these institutions and the reason these processes matter, and the reason protecting them matters, is because those decisions are going to dictate whether your kids and whether your grandkids live in a Texas where due process reigns, where their liberties and their freedoms are protected from a governing, ruling, tyrannical elite who is allowed to silence political opponents and criminalize dissent. I choose to do everything I can. Andy Hopper will choose to do everything he can to make sure that we live in a more free and a more prosperous Texas when we're out of office. And so it's And so it's my honor right now to introduce to the stage somebody who is quite literally the tip of the spear in protecting not just the state of Texas, but I would argue the other 49 states too, against the biggest threat to our constitutional system of divided government, and that is the unconstitutional overreaches coming from a completely out of control and tyrannical Joe Biden federal government that seeks to jeopardize, imperil, and diminish every freedom we have, every liberty we have, our Constitution, federalism, and our state sovereignty on a daily basis. And that is the tip of the spear, fighting to protect the Constitution, fighting to protect the sovereignty of the great state of Texas. Please join me in welcoming our great Attorney General, Ken Paxton. That was fantastic. Thank you, Mr. Attorney General. And on behalf of not just of my constituents in House District 10, but every freedom-loving Texan who values our Constitution and separation of powers, thank you for what you do to protect us on a daily basis from the tyranny of the Biden administration. Guys, I want to start real quick by saying one thank you that I should have done at the beginning. And that's a thank you to every one of you. It's a Monday evening, okay? It's cold, it's wet, rainy, you have family, you have friends. There's an infinite number of things you could have been doing tonight rather than being out here. But let me tell you something. After my time in government service, and something that my friend Andy Hopper is about to learn, is that if we are going to save the state of Texas, and I hate to say this, but that is a question these days, are we going to save the state of Texas? Guys, Ronald Reagan once artfully said that America, he was correct in this, is the last best hope of man on earth. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we are rapidly approaching a situation where the state of Texas may be the last best hope for America. And the reason I say that is because if we're going to save the state of Texas, it's not going to come from the liberal special interest in Austin or Washington. It's not going to come from the top down. It's going to come from the bottom up, from grassroots activists, people that believe in the first principles of our country, like every one of you sitting in these seats. And I know you believe that or you wouldn't be here tonight. And it's going to be because of people like my friend Andy Hopper, who's willing to go attain a seat of power, yes. But he's somebody that I believe, having gotten to know him a little bit, is not going to do what most of the people, like the Attorney General described earlier, where they get in power and then they succumb slowly over time to every pressure, every temptation to cave and to sell you out so that their life right now is more comfortable. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we have a choice right now. We can be comfortable, but that's going to come at the expense of my kids, your kids, and the next generation. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, tonight I want to do something that is technically, if the Attorney General was still here, he would have confirmed. It is kind of it's an unofficial rule in Austin. They don't like to talk about this, but when you get elected, one of the things they tell you are not allowed to do is you are not allowed to get involved in primaries anymore. Well, ladies and gentlemen, they're going to have to do a lot harder or better job than that to shut me up. I've got 4 little kids. The oldest is 9 years old. I didn't sacrifice this much. Andy's not sacrificing this much to try and go down and serve, just to let liberal establishment, weak-kneed Republicans tell me how to behave. Andy's not going to succumb to that. So it's with great pride and privilege that I'm here to do something I'm not supposed to do, but there's too much on the line not to do it. The next generation's on the line. More Republicans need to act like that, and I'm here to endorse my friend Andy Hopper as the next member of the Texas House of Representatives.
Yeah. Y'all, thank you. I don't know if you know what that means, but basically what it means is he's a member of the Republican caucus in the Texas House, and they're going to kick him out. And so what's the point of being a Republican if you stand for Republican principles and ideals? And so that's what, I mean, it's incredibly brave that Brian's done this. Tony Tinderholt did it last week, and it's really cool to see folks being willing to stand against leadership. And that's really what this is all about, is willingness to stand up for their district against leadership that has been weaponized by the Democrats. So what we can do tonight, you guys all know about me, you know who I am, you know our family, you know that we go to this church, and again, thank you all for coming. But what we're gonna do is just kind of take your questions, like ask us anything, love to answer them. Yes, sir.
I have a question about, I used to be a union representative in Arizona over a large group of people, and I realized where the dues go for money, and it's not for Christian values, it's not for families, it's actually about 70% of the dues that they pay in goes to headquarters, and that goes to political action committees like Soros, things like that, stuff that we're directly against. And so people need to be educated about unions and how evil they are. They sound good on the surface, but their true intention is manipulating them and using people's emotions to manipulate, and it's power and it's money. And it's a business, just like any other corporation out there. They have nobody's interest in mind except for the Democratic interest.
Yeah, there's been things going on for a long time that folks have figured out how to basically pull the strings and get things, different power structures to basically support one party or another. And that's one that I think folks are starting to wake up. I think when President Trump got in, I think you started seeing folks realize that maybe their money wasn't going to the right place. But you see it in education, you see it in lots of areas. And that's one of the things that, in public education is actually kind of interesting because historically they back Democrats. In fact, I knocked doors in Bridgeport 2 years ago and actually had a number of ladies say, "Hey, aren't you a homeschool dad?" Well, it says right here, I'm not supposed to vote for you. I got this letter. It says I'm not supposed to vote for you because you're against public education. You're trying to destroy public education. At the same time, I have teachers that teach in local districts in this county that have said, "Hey, I am going to apply to work at a juvenile detention facility because that's a better work environment." So they're not being taken care of by their interests. The reality is that Tony Tinderhold actually put an amendment on the budget in the regular session that would actually increase the homestead exemption for teachers from $100,000 to $150,000, and all the Republicans voted against it except for the conservatives. Isn't that interesting? Kind of tells you because their perception is that all these mainstream establishment Republicans are actually behind them, but the guy that I'm running against voted against it. It's kind of odd. So I think that folks need to understand, that things are changing, and I think that conservatives are willing to stand up for folks as opposed to other individuals and groups. Yes, ma'am.
Can you tell us how many grassroots reps are needed in our House to make a difference?
Right. You want to take this, Brian? The number's 10, but I'm going to let Brian explain it.
Man, it almost strains credulity that in the great Republican-dominated state of Texas, that kind of question has to get asked. There's no firm answer to it. We have 150 members, so the simple answer should be we need 76, right? Well, we have way more than 76 Republicans. The problem is that, as the Attorney General mentioned, we don't have enough people like Andy Hopper that when the rubber meets the road and you've got a tough bill, a bill that your constituents, his future constituents, my constituents would not want me to vote for this bill if they knew about it. And by the way, most bills they don't publicize. They don't talk about them. They don't put it on social media. There's thousands of these things we vote on. They just hope, by the way, the currency of Austin is secrecy. I'm telling you, transparency is kryptonite to the Austin swamp, which is why they hate the fact that those of us who are conservative and are bold have Twitter and Facebook. They do not like that. The reality is we could do a lot of damage against the establishment machine if we had 5 to 10 more people committed to the first principles of keeping our state and our country great. And by that I mean willingness to be bold and say, you know what, I'm going to put my name on a piece of paper that says I am going to challenge a ruling of the chair. Because they tell you when the speaker rules on something, you can't challenge him. If you challenge him, it's career suicide. You're done. You'll never win an election again. They'll destroy you. They say these kinds of things. Guys, we need 10 names to be able to even simply say, hey, I think the speaker and his Democrat parliamentarian just bastardized the House rules to let the Democrats pass one of their priorities, and we need to challenge this. Because so much of what they do doesn't happen by votes, it happens behind the scenes with the parliamentary decisions and the rulings. Because they know if conservative bills get to the floor, most Republicans would have to vote the right way. So what they do, the speaker and his Democrat parliamentarian, they keep it from getting to the floor in the first place. So I need a few more bold members like Andy Hopper who, on the really big things, when the speaker and his Democrat staff keep them off the floor saying, you know what, we've got 10 signatures, we're going to demand a vote of the House. So give us 5 to 10 more, and that would make a lot of progress. That's a long answer to your question.
Yeah, and you all know, because we made a huge deal of it, Wise Conservatives made a huge deal of this whole Democrat chair thing, because we saw it the session before. You all know what a big deal it is, that the fact that Democrats, you just heard it from General Paxton. And so on the second day, there was a vote for the rules, and that vote basically was shut down by the liberal parliamentarian using a crony that got up and issued a point of order that said that this act of taking Democrats out of power, basically saying that the majority has to control all the committee chairmanships, that is unconstitutional, which is ludicrous. It's a ludicrous argument. And only 7 Republicans were willing to put their name on a sheet of paper and sign and say that this is ridiculous. And how many people understand that their representative was not one of those 7? In fact, their representative said we were not allowed to vote We're not allowed to vote to end Democrat chairs. But then last Thursday in Denton, he got up and said, you know what? I'll vote to end Democrat chairs, but it's going to have to be in secret. And he said that 3 times. You can watch the video. He's only willing to get rid of Democrat chairs if it's done by the Republican caucus in secret. The same caucus is going to kick him out. So that's what the deal is. They don't want a record vote because they don't want anyone to be able to show that they are no longer backing their main donor, because that's how they don't get elected again. So, all right, next question. Yes. Yes, ma'am.
Obama puppet get put into that parliamentary role, and how he replaced?
Do you know?
Yeah. Very simple. He was hired by Speaker Bonin and then rehired intentionally by Speaker Dade Phelan. It's part of a deal that they cut with the Democrats. You almost have to say it a few times before it goes into your brain. What the Attorney General said multiple times, what you've heard Andy say, what you hear people. I think it sounds so crazy it goes in one ear and out the other, that the Republican-dominated Texas House of Representatives is run by the Democrats. Guys, the source of power for the leadership team, the air quote Republican leadership team in the Texas House, is the Texas House Democrat Caucus. He can lose the conservatives. There's not enough of us. But he can't lose the Democrats. So every time he has to make a choice, do the right thing, do what conservatives want, do what's right for the future of Texas, or keep the Democrats happy, he's choosing to keep the Democrats in line. And let me make one more point about this Democrat chair issue. We, in the Texas House, ran out of time to do anything on election integrity this session. Do you know that? And what you'll have liberal members of the Texas House brag to you, hey guys, we made illegal voting a felony in Texas. Look at us, we're amazing. What they don't tell you is 2 years before, they voted to make it not a felony and only a misdemeanor. So all they did this last session was come back and undo the misdemeanor and make it a felony that they had undone 2 years before, making no progress. They went backwards 2 steps 2 years ago, then bragged they went 2 steps forward. But here's the real question. What good is election integrity if elected Republicans are just going to give Democrats all their power once they get elected? We need people like Andy Hopper who will stop this insane practice of putting Democrats in charge of the Texas House of Representatives.
Yes, sir.
Aside from electing people like Andy Hopper, which is very important, you made that point very well, is there no way to hold these lawbreakers accountable for the lawlessness, the stuff they did during the impeachment trials and many other things that I'm sure you're aware of? Mm-hmm. Is there no recompense that they get for breaking the laws? Mm-hmm. They just do anything they want unless we have the right number of people there to stand up and hold them accountable?
Yeah. No, I mean, that's the deal. I mean, we see it in every aspect of our lives at this point. We see that basically it requires us, the populace, to basically stand up and follow the law. And at some point, folks just realize, I mean, a great example is public information requests. Public information request is a system that basically is kind of like the FOIA system. And you can issue a public information request that says, I'm a citizen, I want you to provide me this information I'm entitled to. But what you find out when you peel back the covers is that there's whole agencies in Texas that just ignore them. You know, that's a real thing. And who's going to prosecute that? Who's paid by the government to go, and is there a criminal penalty? No, there's no criminal penalty. It requires people that want to follow the law. And jurisdictions, political jurisdictions, even agencies in the state, if they just decide that they don't want to answer a public information request, they don't answer the public information request. I've heard from a number of reporters that have been filing public information requests against the TMD over the last 2 years for Operation Lone Star and other things that they have not gotten the information back from the TMD that they've been asking for. And that's one example. And so, you know, it requires people to actually stand up and elect people who are willing to do things like enact criminal penalties, enact civil penalties on all these things. It's unfortunate we have to do it, but that's the deal. I mean, there's no, tell me if I'm wrong, is there any penalty for Dade Phelan?
The ultimate thing, and it's going to sound simple and trite, but guys, just hear me as somebody who was somebody who ran against somebody who was an incumbent for 6 years, who the establishment, I on paper should have been crushed. I had like no name ID, I had no money, I was running against somebody who'd been there for 6 years, outspent 3-1. The accountability, it comes from the voters. That is the ultimate accountability. If your representative is voting in a way that you don't believe aligns with your values, then you need to go vote them. You vote for somebody else. In this case, you vote for somebody like Andy Hopper. Okay, but here's the more important point that Attorney General Paxton said. and it's the way that real conservatives, because it's the only way real conservatives like I can win. I didn't have any of the PACs behind me. They were all behind my opponent. I didn't have the unions behind me. They were behind him. So we talked about unions a minute ago. The big PACs in Austin are not behind the people fighting for freedom and liberty and the Constitution. You know why? Because there's no money in that. You got to have people that are really actually willing to sacrifice to fight for these things, and it's hard to find that in office. So you've got to vote for them. But to what Attorney General Paxton said, it can't just be you. Look, guys, I am an optimist on most things because I do believe there are more people who have the values of our founders than people who do not. The problem is we're a lot quieter than they are. But even if there's more people who still believe in freedom and liberty, if we don't all get out and vote, what difference does it make? So I can't stress it enough. Before you go to bed tonight, go to social media. Go to your Facebook, go to your email, go to your text messages. You tell them you came to an event tonight, and you stay on, whatever those 20 people are, between now and Election Day. Check in with them. Go to Facebook. Annoy the heck out of these people. If he's willing to sacrifice this much, and guys, it is hard. It is sacrifice. Knocking on these doors, making the phone calls. It's time away from your family and your kids and your wife. It's hard. Please do it with him. Do it with me. Do it with every other conservative leader in the state of Texas who wants to save our state, because if we lose Texas, we lose America.
Let me just add to that. Being away from your family is huge, and it's a big deal. But I'm telling you what, my wife has been with me the entire time. So give her a hand. Every time we knock doors, she's in the car, she's driving me, she's sick to death of me. But anyways, we're still together. Yes, sir.
Yeah, it's obvious that Attorney General Paxton is going around and trying to help people like yourselves and Andy to get elected. Have you guys done any assessment? Do you think that the odds are favorable that we're going to get at least 10 or maybe even 15 or 20 people to replace some of these legislators that are in power right now?
I think we have a really good chance. I keep track with a lot of other candidates. Some of them are my friends. I know Shelley Luther's running over in HD 62. I think it's Reggie Smith. And I tell you, her campaign's a whole different campaign than it was 2 years ago. Mike Olcott, that guy is going to kick Glenn Rogers' butt. There is no question in that race. I think David Covey has a really good chance against Dade Phelan, from what I'm hearing. So that's three others, but the thing about it is you have Kyle Bienerman that's running down in Central Texas against Troxclair. He's a former rep. He actually represented over half of that district before. So I think he has a very good chance. There's probably other districts that I'm not aware of, but Wes Friedell's good. He's the head of GOA, and he's running, and his opponent was so worried, Andrew Murr, he's the guy with the mustache that was actually prosecuting Paxton. And that guy fled. He just said, I'm not going to run again. So I think Wes Friedell is the heir apparent for that district. So that's 5. And I think there's a bunch more. I mean, there's 51 districts last I checked. 51 districts with challengers running against incumbent Republicans. The law of averages would say we're going to win some of them. What do you think?
I'll say I've never seen the grassroots as active and engaged as they are right now, which is a testament to you. But I want to still be honest with you. I don't like to sugarcoat anything. Beating incumbents is hard. It's really hard. That's why before your head hits that pill tonight, you've got to go to social media, start texting friends to help him. I'm serious. I'm going to say this over and over because it matters. But I'm going to say one other thing too. Even if our speaker were to be defeated, or I need you to understand, if we don't get these extra conservatives in the Texas House, the person who's elected next is just going to be Dade Phelan 2.0. We've got to change the makeup of the Texas House. And I'll say I was out with, there's more enthusiasm. The turnout you're having on a Monday evening, guys, again, thank you so much for being here. The turnout you had at lunch today is a testament to that. I was out in Canton campaigning for my friend Brent Money. Me and Senator Ted Cruz went out there. For him, we had at 8 a.m. on a Friday morning in Canton, Texas, we had 400 people show up for the real conservative in that race. So keep praying, but work also.
Yes, ma'am.
So I don't know the rules, but are you able to campaign at, like, say, high schools, or if not anything of that nature, what can be done to get the younger generations, the age groups that don't vote in?
Right. Well, it's a tough thing, and part of it is that we have a culture of this country of basically disconnectedness. And we were just at a Turning Point USA Faith event this past week, and there's a big effort to try to get the churches involved, and that's one way to try to get the kids involved as well. So I think that it's interesting because you really can't just waltz into a high school and start campaigning. It's not something that, I don't think there's any illegality, but I think that it's an extremely bad form. But the thing about it is that getting the parents connected, going door to door, a lot of folks don't understand, they don't even, and honestly, quite honestly, everything we talk about election integrity, a lot of folks don't even believe in elections. So that's part of the effort, is to try to get people to believe that, hey, you know what? I know you don't believe in it. Are you ready for the non-political solution? A lot of people are like, yeah, well, you start that, and maybe we'll join in. But until then, let's do a political solution here. Let's try to do everything we can to save our state politically, and that involves going to the polls and voting. So that's kind of the effort. So, yes, sir.
Did you mention that there's a group going down to block walk for David Covey on February the 17th? So if you're not block walking for Andy that day, go block walk for the individual that's running against that.
Yep. Yeah. So feeling scared to death, and honestly he should be, because his record is abysmal. He's deplorable, and he needs to go home. Next, any other questions? Yes.
Really for Brian, as a current member of the House, HB 13, creation of the Texas Homeland Security Department, can you kind of give us a temperature on your counterparts down there and what that bill's going to do?
Yeah, and so I have not followed the latest on that one, but let me tell you, on the issue of border security, it's an issue, probably the top issue for me right now, other than education, freedom, empowering parents to secure that border. Now listen, let me tell you what happened, because I meant to get to that earlier, so I'm glad you mentioned this, because it's a related issue. We had something called House Bill 20, the Texas Border Protection Unit Act, which I think is more important than that one. Like, if I had to pick, this is where I want people focusing on. So if you're talking about homeland security issues in the state of Texas, I want you remembering House Bill 20 and the Texas Border Protection Unit Act. Not that that's not important, but this is the one. This was the big one. All right, this had, I helped President Trump with Title 42. I wrote the Texas Title 42 Act. I worked with Representative Matt Schaefer. He wrote the Border Protection Unit Act. We merged them together. This was the big bill, and the leadership of the Texas House led everyone to believe they were going to pass a big, bold border security bill. Well, at the last minute, when it finally gets to the floor, I think on the last day you can bring bills to the floor. What happens? We saw the same movie you see 100 times or 1,000 times a session. Some Democrat walks up to the back mic and goes, "Mr. Speaker, I raise an objection, point of order on this bill." And the Speaker goes, "Oh, what do you think, Mr. Barack Obama, White House lawyer? Is the Democrats' objection to our Border Protection Unit Act sound? Oh, it is sound? Okay, the point of order is well taken and sustained. We're done. The bill's dead." No votes. Guys, there's no chance I could have even gotten 10 Republicans to object to that ruling. And that happened 7-8 months ago. We're having over 300,000 illegals crossing our border every month. The 10th largest city in America is about 1.1 million. We are importing the equivalent of the 10th largest American city into this country every few months. And what did your Texas House of Representatives do about it during the regular session? Nothing. What did they do about it in the first special session? Nothing. What did they do about it in the second special session? Nothing. What did they do about it in the third special session? Nothing. Well, Governor Abbott kept bringing us back, and we finally passed a bill. It was a good bill. I was proud to support it, but it was not the bold bill to secure our border and protect our state that you and your kids deserve. That was killed by the liberal leadership in the Texas House, and if we had more real conservatives in there, we would have passed the Border Protection Unit Act.
Yes.
We have another conservative running that would be a real help to you, Carrie Kingsbury. She was at lunch today, and she is over in HD 68, the neighboring county section for yours. As she's running against David Spiller, who spent 6 weeks, in fact, on that investigative quietly in the first session, only for all those other sessions, and then they squeak out their tiny little border bill that he claims is his, even though it's an SD bill, SD4. So anyway, I just want to encourage you to keep doing what you're doing, and we do need to shut that border down, because the Supreme Court now again today has ruled that, take down whatever, those guys did down on the border in Texas. It's absolutely ridiculous that we cannot respect it.
So how many people watched the impeachment? Okay. How many people watched the House vote? Okay, so good. So we were in the gallery. You were down on the floor. And it was interesting because what you saw in the gallery is a bunch of people with their feet up on their desks, people yawning, trying to stay awake. They couldn't care less as this case was being laid out. Half the people were walking around, not around. But the moment that they took the vote, it was, usually when you see votes, it kind of takes a second because a few people vote, and they look to see how other people vote. They knew exactly how they were going to vote. There was no question at all. But David Spiller was this guy that basically laid out this whole case, and he basically made Paxton sound out like he was an absolute criminal. And I think that it's interesting because one of the things that General Paxton actually mentioned this morning when he was talking was the fact that David Spiller actually was defending Paxton and saying he was the best attorney general in America just weeks before. So it really shows you how much power leadership has over these people. It's insane to actually go to bat and take this really, really deep cut for this vote so that you can do it for Dade Fillings because he didn't like the guy. But it's interesting that the guy that I'm running against has said the following things. Like, he was on the Whiskey Bros podcast last month and actually made the point that he didn't actually vote to impeach Paxton, that anyone who follows Texas politics knows that that's not something the House can even do. He actually said that. Go watch that. We're going to send in a link to that because he actually said that. And then he's actually gotten up at other times and said, you know what, I was actually doing Paxton a favor. By voting to impeach Paxton, I was giving the Senate an opportunity to clear his name. I never want this guy on my grand jury ever. On Thursday, he gets up and actually says, you know what? We actually were at this debate on Thursday in Denton County. He gets up and he starts with that whole thing about kind of clearing his name, but he couldn't help himself. By the end, he says, just you wait. It's not over. So we have kind of a wide range of rhetoric. The bottom line is they really can't stand Ken Paxton. I think that's almost everything that you need to know. So any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Your homeschool dad.
Yes, ma'am.
Asking for a friend, if that vote ever came back up on the floor again, what's your position?
Yeah. You mean on HB1? Okay. So let's talk about HB1 for just a second. So that was a bill that basically, my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, about $7 billion to public schools to basically give $400 million to school choice. Now, talk about school choice. Like, the entire idea of school choice is the fact that you're putting economic pressure on public schools to do better. Like, you're using capitalism to improve the system. If you're giving 10 times more money to public schools than you're giving to school choice, you're not even doing that. So anyways, it is what it is. That was the bill, but it was kind of a test vote on school choice. The bill, there was an amendment to it to basically strip ESAs. And I wouldn't have voted to strip ESAs, but here's what I will fight for if I'm your representative. And I've said this a million times, I'm very clear about it. I personally think that these people know that they're not going to pass school choice, that they are not interested in passing school choice. They want to virtue signal as though they want to pass school choice. I think that if they wanted to pass something tomorrow, we would start with a tax deduction, sales tax, property tax, just like ag. It's a system that already exists. Your appraisal district already has the ability to plug something like that in. And the cool part is a lot of homeschoolers would prefer to do that because there's no strings with such a system, right? That's one of the things you talk about to a lot of homeschoolers, the strings, and that's in the Republican Party legislative priority. That's why it's education freedom and not school choice, is because they say with no strings attached. And so I think that's one of the concerns of homeschoolers, is that they basically will be forced to take STAR tests for their kids and whatnot. So anyways, that's what I'm going to fight for, is something like that. Phil King, who was our previous state rep, had a really good constitutional amendment in the Senate. I think a version of it actually passed the Senate, of course, didn't go anywhere in the House, that would have basically created a constitutional amendment that protected homeschoolers and private schoolers from strings. And so that's one of the things I will also fight for. But I would have voted for it because I think that anything we can do to fix public schools is a good thing. But obviously the bill that as it was not something that I think that universal school choice supporters would want. So you have anything to add?
We could be here till tomorrow talking about the issue of school choice. But I'll say this, I agree with conservative leaders like our great Senator Ted Cruz that school choice is a civil rights issue of our time. And I say this, by the way, as a proud public school parent. My dad is a public school board trustee. My children all attend our local public elementary schools. Like Governor Abbott, I want Texas to have the best public schools in the nation. That's my goal. But one of the best ways to get there is to never take our eye off the goal. Two things when it comes to education in Texas. They've got to be our top priorities. We never should sacrifice on either. Number one, educating students. Every child, when they turn 18 and get a diploma in their hands, need to be prepared to provide for themselves and a family as a functional member of our society. And number two, empowering the parents. Nobody knows a child like that parent, and I want to have our parents be able to choose the best environment for their kids to go to school. And I'll tell you right now, as a member of the Public Education Committee, this is going to shock you. We have to have our eyes wide open with what we're dealing with. Guys, the left targeted education a generation ago. We are playing catch up now. Only 24% of Texas 8th graders are proficient in reading. Only 23% of Texas 8th graders are proficient in mathematics. If we continue the trend of liberal indoctrination, taxpayer-funded liberal indoctrination on the rise, and education rates plummeting, guys, every freedom and liberty that you hold dear is going to be on the chopping block within the next 18 years. We've got to turn the course around. And the best way to do that is to let competition do what it does in education, in every other sector of our economy, where over time prices go down and quality goes up. And the way you can do that in education is to give parents, put them in charge of their kids' education, and make the public schools responsive to the needs of the parents for the first time, so that the public schools themselves improves and that every kid can be in an environment that best serves their unique interests. I will not stop fighting for that issue. It's one of the biggest issues. And by the way, school choice is, if you support teachers, you should support school choice. We're depriving them of a competitive salary. If you support our public schools, you should support school choice. If you support parents, you should support school choice. And if you support students, you should support it, because education rates go up in every state that has been tried. So the bill that was brought to us to bring this full circle was a problematic bill, a massively problematic bill, because our liberal Republican leader let the people who hate school choice write the school choice bill. Go figure.
And one thing, a slight sidestep on that, but I think it's interesting to point out, how many people know how much it costs to educate illegals in the state? Like, it's kind of hard to get that figure. The best that we can come up with is between $5 and $10 billion a year. So we're sitting there talking about a bill that costs, $7 to $8 billion. That was a school choice bill that mostly benefited public schools and didn't benefit universal school choice at all. But then we're sitting there basically keeping an open border where we're basically educating illegals, and we're wondering, why is the school system not performing the way we want, when in actuality we're putting tremendous amounts of our capital and resources to educate people that came here illegally, and that needs to stop. So anyways.
Really fast, because you asked about homeschool real fast, I do want to make this point. So I was on the beginning, it ties right into something the Attorney General said about how conservatives are treated. I believe in school choice and parental empowerment and education freedom to my core. But over my dead body, are we going to let government have a further intrusion and regulations on private school and homeschool families? And that's what they were trying to do in the regular session. And myself and one other real conservative on the Public Education Committee kept saying no. We will not support this bill if you put this government red tape on homeschool families. So what does the speaker do? This is not a joke. He didn't just boot me off the committee. No, that'd have been too obvious. He just stood up a new committee called the Select Committee on Education, and it had everybody else except for the two conservatives on it. So that is what happens if you fight for conservatism in the Texas House. You're either booted off the sidelines, quite literally, or they just make a new committee on the same jurisdiction. You're just not allowed to be part of it.
Any other questions before we close up? Yes, sir.
Andy, you kind of gave us a rundown of how your opponent voted on the impeachment vote and everything. Are there some other votes that you could tell us about, such as the vote for the speaker, how he voted on those
Right.
things? Some others.
Right. So the way the speakers are selected is they actually have a private vote in, was it November or December of the year before? So there's 6 people who vote against it. I don't think he was one of those 6, but anyways, we'll never know. But there's a public vote that occurs on the first day of session. It's the first thing that the legislature does, is select the speaker. So on that vote, of course, he voted for Dade Phelan, even though we had calling campaigns to get him, please do not vote for Dade Phelan. So that's one example. I'll tell you some of the other things that I think are very interesting, other than votes to impeachment, other than the vote for Democrat not standing up for Democrat chairs. There's so many other aspects that I think are just basically overall government growth and overreach. So they passed the largest budget increase in Texas history. The conservatives voted against that. It was not insignificant. It's 42%. It's actually $67 billion. Give you an idea. $65 billion is the military budget of Russia. Okay, so that's how much our budget grew in one biennium, and that was voted on. Tony Tinderholt raised an amendment to basically increase the property taxes from $12 billion to $20 billion. He voted against that. There was actually a really insidious red flag law, SB 798, I believe, but it's on my website. And you can actually go look at that. But this was actually something that was part of Biden's BSCA gun control. It was actually like any kid that's as a minor that touches the system. And how many people know that kids these days touch the system? Like half of them are on Ritalin, half of them are on some sort of ADD medication, whatever. So they are seeing mental health professionals. But if we consider every kid that sees mental health or seeks counseling to be a kid that needs to be reported to NICS, well, that's what this bill does. And that was passed. He voted for that twice. There was a bill called the Glock switch bill that basically illegalizes your right to even own a tool to convert a gun from a semi-automatic to an automatic. Just to even own the tool, voted for that. Voted for just really silly stuff as well. I mean, voted for 2 Muslim holidays last session. This session voted for this LGBTQ thing. Voted 31 times over the course of his career for every single 3-day weekend that this House has ever passed. It's actually kind of interesting. Here's the thing. We have a legislator that is basically standing up and voting for however Dade Phelan tells him to. There's a really important bill, HB 12, which Brian actually wrote about quite a bit on Twitter, and I'd like to have him explain this. But basically what this bill does, among other things, is it expands Obamacare in Texas, and it creates as a financial incentive for abortion. So this was a bill that when grassroots got wind of this, is like, no, this is actually going to increase abortion in Texas. The grassroots started calling legislators and said, this HB 12 is a terrible bill. Well, Stuckey voted for it on second reading. In Texas House, there's second reading, which is really the most important vote. And then there's third reading, which is usually anecdotal because that test vote for second reading has already been passed. So he voted for second reading, voted for it for third reading, which is the final, now it's sent to the Senate, voted for it for third reading, and then he changes his vote, which I think is very, very interesting. So it's interesting to me that he's willing to basically tell you that he's voting one way, but he'll vote another way. And that's, sometimes there's some good faith, bad voting, and people will change their vote, but how many people know that you can't actually change your vote in the House? Whenever that line is snapped and you vote a certain way, that's what the vote is. So do you want to add a little bit about HB 12?
Not much to add. I've put about this on Twitter. It is true. It's a complicated bill. The really short version of it, though, is that it massively increased Medicaid in the state of Texas. It massively will increase your taxes, and it absolutely rewards people financially who have elective abortions in the state of Texas. I voted no on it. No is, I believe, the correct vote. Unambiguously. And then on the budget, I'm not that old, I'm 41, but I remember when Republicans used to talk about wanting to cut government. And in the state of Texas, guys, the budget, HB 1 that we passed last session, was the most bloated, liberal, reckless, out of control liberal budget ever in the history of the state of Texas. And if we continue this trajectory, we will be doubling the size of government in the state of Texas every 2 to 3 sessions. The only correct vote was no, but I think there were only about 3 of us that voted against that insanely liberal budget.
I was thinking about other things that kind of maybe violate your sensibilities. There was actually a bill to allow basically illegals to vote with a TWIC ID. So a TWIC ID is something you get from the Department of Transportation or whatever. It comes from federal government. Illegals get it when they come across the border. There was a bill that would actually allow asylum seekers to be able to use their TWIC ID and show it to when they vote. And that he voted for that, if you can believe that. Yes. So anyways, there's actually, if you go to my website, hopperfortexas.com, there's /my-opponent. There's actually cards on my little table out there, and you can pick it up. There's a QR code. You can go to it, and you can actually see all of his votes topically by topic, and you can see here, if you click it, it takes you to the journal. So you don't have to believe me. It's a matter of public record. Yes, sir. Hey, what's going on, Steve? It's Steve Brown, everybody.
So, I heard you talking about abortion, which is great. Roe versus Wade, everybody knows it's dead. But not as many people know that abortion is still legal in Texas. Would you speak to that on where your positions are if you are in line with Abolish Abortion Texas or organizations like it?
Yeah. Well, I'm on Abolish Abortion slate card. And I was endorsed today by Texas Right to Life. So it's interesting, though, because my position, I don't know about y'all's, my position is life begins at conception, and every human being deserves equal protection under the law. So. One last question, and we'll let y'all go home. I'm so sorry.
That's okay. Mine kind of goes with the social media aspect of everything. Have you, either of you guys put on an email out to your people, a list of the guys that we should, even though they're not in our district, that we can go out there on social media and talk about, and we have friends that live all over. So that way we can get the word out more that way. I know, I mean, I go and look people up. I email all these people. I don't care if they're in my district or not. I'm emailing them because I'm mad. You know, and I'm nice about it. But I do get my voice out there. But is there something that y'all have, like a list of guys that you know they're good, that are like not incumbents or incumbents, either one?
You mean across the state and other districts? Yeah.
We have friends all over the state, I'm sure most of us do. So when we put something out, we can say something good about this guy. Hey, I saw this guy does this. It just put a button.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these organizations, True Texas Project does statewide slate cards. I would recommend going out there. You know, there's lots of, Grassroots America is another good one. We are, Wise County Conservatives is closely associated with Grassroots America. Joanne puts out a list of endorsements. Hers are comprehensive and statewide. So I think that there are, yes, there are websites. Yeah. Anything else to add there, Brian?
I have money to get, you know,
Yeah.
campaigns. That's one thing that I do. Is I'm on social media and I go talk about everybody's things.
Yeah. You know, one other thing, JR, I was going to point out is that there was a bill called HB 5, which was basically a corporate welfare plan. Now, this was very interesting. Texas Republican Party actually passed a platform plank because they were so offended by this Chapter 313 corporate welfare that finally expired a couple years ago, that they put it in a platform that says the Texas Republican Party explicitly opposes any sort of system that basically transfers tax money from taxpayers to corporations. And interestingly enough, this is actually one of the very few things. If you knock a Democrat door, I'll tell you, you can talk about two things that really they agree with: term limits, and they're against corporate welfare. It's interesting, but the Democrat platform also opposes corporate welfare. Well, the Texas legislature this session passed a bill called HB 5, which not only expanded Chapter 313, it actually took the language out that made sure that businesses had to prove that they created new jobs. So that was even stripped. Stuckey was a co-author of that. And I just cannot say enough about the fact that it's $18 billion. Like $12.7 billion is all you guys got back in a tax break. $33 billion is what the Texas legislators start with in terms of a surplus. It's surplus in revenue. And instead of giving that back to you, they should have given every dime back to you. Tony Tinderholt tried to get them to up it to $20 billion, and Stuckey voted against that. But they should have given as much as they possibly could have. They gave you $12.7 billion, but you can see where their heart was. They gave $18 billion in corporate welfare. So that's what actually happened. All right, so y'all, thank you very, very much for coming. I really appreciate it. It's huge to give your evening to us and to support this campaign. I want to tell you, we have yard signs outside. We have information on how you can sign up our email list, figure out how you can help us, because we need your help. We're in the final stretch here, and we need everybody to help and jump in and figure out. And I tell you what, this is going to be an effort that we just so appreciate everything that you can do to help us stand at polls. So just reach out to us, and thank you all much for coming. Brian, you want to say anything?
No, just thank you again for being here. Guys, the Texas legislature needs more elected Republicans that are more concerned about not just doing what sadly too many elected Republicans at all levels have become, which is a party that cares about this acquisition of power for its own sake, as opposed to the acquisition of power to fight for the next generation. I want to make government as irrelevant to your lives as possible so we can be as free as God meant for us to be. Thank you for coming out. Tell all of your friends and family to vote for Andy Hopper.